Well, we're back for the second half of the first season of For All Mankind. And we begin with Apollo 23 in late August of 1974. Gene Kranz has been promoted to director of Johnson Space Center, and Michael Collins is commanding his own mission. Collins was the command module pilot of Apollo 11. Guess he's been busy. Ed Baldwin, meanwhile, is currently leading the occupants of Jamestown, their moon base, which are Danielle and Gordo. And there's a speech because the first female flight director at NASA has finally arrived, but it's not Margo. No, it's Irene Hendricks, who only got this job because of her husband, Jimmy. Sometimes I worry I become so old people won't get my jokes. Margo gives her a look that could melt tungsten, but most other women are focused on the Equal Rights Amendment. Kennedy defeated Nixon in 1972 in this world, which is interesting because Nixon was re-elected in a landslide in reality. I'm guessing the idea is that Kennedy beat up on Nixon over losing the race to the moon, and that with his early departure from Vietnam probably hurt him with many of the conservative voters. I mean, no matter what Nixon did in Vietnam, it was never going to get the left on his side. He was like Lord Sauron to them. So there was probably a 1-2 punch of looking soft on commies by losing in space to them and losing in Southeast Asia to them by not leaving with honor. I mean, I'm guessing. I know a few things about Nixon, but not as much as I do about space. Presidential scandals aren't as interesting to me as going to the moon. No, not even if they involve blowjobs. Well, Deke has a little history of his own to make. Apollo 24 is going to have him aboard. He's been medically cleared for flight status, and damn it, he wants to go into outer space already. There's bound to be some shit stirred up over that, but nothing compared to what Ellen's bartender girlfriend might do if she doesn't stop at the public displays of affection. As it's noted, the ERA is about equal rights for women, not homosexuals. Ellen has to be much more aware of it because she's the one who's going to be in a lot more trouble if it gets out. It's not like the bartender's going to be fired from tending bar, whereas it's not like Ellen can go down the road and get a job at another space exploration agency. He makes that point clear. I forget if we ever were told what this guy's name was. Now, normally when that happens in the show, I just refer to him by what he's most notable for in the story. But since that's being gay and working at NASA, this is probably a moment when that policy shouldn't be used. I'll just call him Brock until something comes along. I tend to treat characters in shows like Shepard does in Stargate Atlantis. Just throw a name at somebody to make things convenient and hope it doesn't blow up in my face. Like that.
And the data? Last flight, we came close to exceeding angle of attack limits.
Oh, that's not good. No, don't destroy a Saturn V rocket on your first day. After the titles, we learn the shitstorm this is. Not only did it kill Gene Kranz, which has got to be an odd experience for him, as he was still very much alive when I made this video. But the 3 astronauts, while alive, thanks to the safety systems that blast the module away to parachute into the ocean, well, those guys were injured when it didn't actually hit the ocean. Fortunately for the team on the moon, Titan rockets are still being used to send supplies to them so they can go on living. The FBI wants to start investigations in case the KGB had sabotaged the rocket. Deke and Irene say this is pointless. They know what did this, but you're not stopping the FBI once they get their teeth around a bone. I'm not sure why I went with that analogy. Probably a 2001: A Space Odyssey thing. Speaking of computer problems, Margo is trying to sort something out, only for one of the others in Mission Control to point out the unfairness of the fact that all Gene got was a picture and a plaque. He was a man who gave his everything to get us to the moon, and he's just a footnote. And the other 11 who died with him aren't even an asterisk. Well, that's when Margo spots Aleda up behind the glass. If there's an unexplained fire, she would be my first suspect. Well, that new head of NASA calls Margo in to collect an outside report on the Saturn V, which she thinks is pretty rich given they passed her over for the flight director job for Irene, and now they want her to run errands. He explains that the rumors are true, metal fatigue in this one component. So they need to get the report completed and sent out, so that they can then buy replacements, fix all the Saturn V's they've got waiting to go into space, and Bob's your uncle. Or in this case, Werner's your uncle. They can't issue their findings until they get von Braun's report, and he won't hand it over to anyone but Margo. She doesn't want anything to do with him, but the guy says, too bad, do it anyway, even though we just slapped you across the face by denying you a promotion. You're welcome. Well, the Soviets have finally got a base on the moon and put a crew in it, 8+ miles north of Jamestown, since they need the ice of Shackleton Crater too. Nixon gives Kennedy his views on having NASA and Soviet crews on the moon at the same time, but all Kennedy wants to talk about is Nixon himself, that he's decided to pardon him for anything related to the Watergate break-in. An irony, considering that at the time, Kennedy castigated Gerald Ford for doing exactly that. Ford did so believing the country needed to just move on, and further investigations would have made that impossible, a move that many think is likely the reason he failed to get reelected. Ted Kennedy, it should be noted, later reversed himself when he was present for Ford receiving the Profiles in Courage Award, named in honor of his brother, that Ford had made the supreme sacrifice for the good of the nation. Here, Kennedy just thinks it looks bad prosecuting your political enemies, and I can't really argue with that. Meanwhile, Tracy tells Gordo she's put a deposit down on an apartment for him. Seems she's taken all the bullshit from him that she will. She mentions that there's no sneaking anything to him either now. With the FBI everywhere, it's impossible to get near the resupply rockets. Speaking of the G-men, Brock gets called in and starts in with the whole, have you been going to these places that only a gay man would go? That was a huge deal back then, as being gay was seen as a security risk and you'd be fired, because if anyone knew, they could blackmail you by saying, do what I want or I'll tell everyone you're gay and you'll be fired. Brock tells Ellen and the bartender about it, saying he's been through a lot of these things and there's never been a problem before, but this guy, he gives off a vibe that he's looking for homosexuals at NASA to bust.
It's that, or you can tell him the truth and get us both shit canned out of NASA and held up as degenerate perverts before the whole world.
I've always resented that phrase. My perversions are of the utmost good taste. Well, Margo shows up at von Braun's house and is stuck having dinner with him. Naturally, he knows he's not going to just win her over by feeding her dinner. That's why he brought the accordion. Ist das nicht dein Schnitzelbank? Ja, das ist dein Schnitzelbank. Yeah, I lamented about referencing Jimi Hendrix, and I just went downhill from there, didn't I? Actually, the reason that he wanted her to come here was because of her late father, who made von Braun promise to share things with Margo after he passed. Seems she had a rough time with the old man, too. But von Braun says that he was involved in top-secret work, and not with radar as he'd told her mother. He worked on the Manhattan Project. He helped crack how to get a plutonium sphere to compress to critical mass. His work led to the bomb that destroyed Nagasaki. His detachment was a result of massive guilt that he had as being part of something he felt was evil, and so he asked von Braun to share this so that maybe Margo would understand why he had been so distant. Which, I can imagine he was. I saw Oppenheimer. Oof. Well, Ellen and the bartender have gotten complicated because Ellen's not sure where this might be going. She says she's not even totally sure she's gay. Could be that it's just this one specific woman that she's attracted to. That seems to be her reasoning. I'd speculate, but trying to examine someone's relationship with their sexuality, that's something I strictly reserve for non-humanoid aliens. Well, von Braun and Margo further discuss things, and she's still bothered by his past. And he shares something that's even more unpleasant than your daddy helped usher in the nuclear state. The fact that Irene was promoted over Margo confirms his belief that her talents are being wasted. That's something she doesn't want to hear, but he points out what the problem is, why her goal of one day running NASA will never happen, because she's not a team player, and she doesn't want to play the social game to be seen as one. Irene was promoted over her not for superior ability, but because she demonstrated those traits related to interacting with others. I'd comment on that, but considering 70% of my remarks at work are directed at cats, I'm not really qualified. Margo's not happy over this news, but von Braun shares something more, something of immense value. the reason why the rocket failed. Not the technical reason, the actual reason. See, the part that failed was indeed the culprit, but it's because the manufacturer changed. Ted Kennedy had promised to prioritize passing the Equal Rights Amendment, and he got Illinois to do so. But in order to persuade them, he moved a lucrative NASA contract to the state. And apparently they do a piss-poor job of making this valve. 12 men died because of a political move to a substandard manufacturer. It would create a shitstorm when it got out. It would stain Kennedy's big achievement with the death of a dozen people, including a senior NASA official. So yeah, they are going to bury this thing so deep you have a better chance of finding out who shot his brother. So the question, as von Braun implies to her, is, what will she do with this knowledge? Now, personally, I'm not in favor of coercion. However, I am fully supportive of blackmail. Kieran comes in for her chance to talk with the Jamestown, and after a conversation about getting an operation done to presumably help have another child, or possibly to get breast implants, the conversation is actually kind of fuzzy. But they get around to Shane wondering about Ed coming back. Naturally, the LEM that they arrived in is right outside. The command module is still in orbit for when they come home. It's not like they landed and ate the thing. But no, they need to keep this post manned, otherwise the Ruskies will come over and TP the place, which, seems wasteful when you consider how long they'd have to stand in line for that toilet paper. The crew has a habit of saying "Hi, Bob" to each other, too. It's, in fact, the title of the next episode, because NASA keeps sending them the same 6 episodes of the Newhart show. Clearance costs, even alternate universe NASA has to deal with copy bots. Well, Margo shares the report, and as predicted, not only does the NASA head declare it top secret, he follows that up with a threat of what would happen if Margo revealed its contents. Seeing that von Braun was right that every bureaucracy is corrupt one way or another, she uses this to her advantage, saying that she made a copy and it will be sent to the New York Times if she doesn't personally tell the one who has it not to. So yes, she'll get a flight director job, even if they have to demote someone. She also drops off her slide rule with Aleda to help her do the complex problems a little easier, so that's good. And up on the moon, Gordo goes apartment hunting, as he calls it. That is, running around on the surface to metaphorically get some fresh air. That's when he spots some flashing lights. Either it's time for garbage pickup on the moon, or the Russians are up to something. What is it? Let's go on to part 7.